Hey guys, John here. So the biggest question I always get when I do these courses is where can I get access to the source code? So I obviously can't upload that here on YouTube, so I've made that available for you over on BitTorrent. And along with the source code, you'll also be able to actually download the videos to your computer so you can have them forever. So if for some reason something crazy happened and I decided to delete them, or YouTube kicked me off of their site or whatever, it wouldn't really matter for you, because you would have all the source code, you'd have all the videos, everything essentially that I've created for the course you would have on your own computer. So I've created a link in the description where you can find that stuff over on BitTorrent. Please consider going over there, supporting me that way. I'd appreciate that. Also, please consider making a donation here on YouTube using the fan funding. This is how, or one of the ways that I'm able to keep all of the videos that I'm doing and releasing here on YouTube for free, by those who are able to pitching in and allowing me to do that. So please consider that. And if you need access to any of the resources that I use through everything that I do online, coding, releasing videos, etc., you can head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/resources, and I have a whole slew of all sorts of different resources, from hosting to different tutorials and just everything over there that I use. So again, johnmorrisonline.com/resources. All right, on to the lesson.
Hey there, John Morris here. I'm the lead instructor for the Wishlist Member Certified Developers Program and the CEO here at johnmorrisonline.com. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to use dynamic widths in your responsive design. Now, this particular skill is really kind of the bedrock of a fluid grid, or that's where it's really used most heavily, although any of the different approaches that you could take, you're going to use dynamic widths. But again, the fluid grid is where it's used most heavily. And again, kind of like media queries are what make responsive design possible, and dynamic widths are kind of the second corollary to that, in the sense that they make it work. So it's really, this is the majority, again, of what you're going to do when you are building your responsive website. So again, a very, very important individual skill for you to learn. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to use dynamic widths in your design and master this skill. Right, so we have our design here. We'll just go ahead and take a quick look at what we're looking at here. So you notice I'm full screen. I'm on a 1920 pixel width screen, which is basically a full HD screen, and I have this box here at kind of this fixed width centered on my screen. Okay, if we look at the CSS here, then you'll see that the width I'm at is 1170 pixels. Right, so if I shrink this down, you'll notice that, let me go ahead and move this over a little bit so we can see this a little better. All right, so we're kind of almost at full here. Squeeze this down just a little. And as we move this smaller, you notice that it stays the same like our fluid grid until we get down to about 1200 pixels, where we know, well, our width here is 1170, so right around 1200 we're going to be squeezing pretty tight. So we change now here the width to 980 pixels. And if we keep going down here, we're about down to 980 pixels on our device. So then we change it again to 750 pixels. And if we keep going, eventually, as we get close to 750 pixels, we're going to say, at this point, we're going to go ahead and flip this to 100% width right here. Okay, and then we'll keep that until we go down. All right, so that's essentially dynamic widths in a nutshell. Basically what you're doing is you're using media queries in conjunction with the width setting, or the width property for an element to change its width as the screen size changes. And because you're querying different different widths of devices, you know how many pixels you're going to have available, so you know how you can resize your element, whatever it happens to be, in order to make it fit on the screen. All right, so if we come over here, if we look at the CSS here, this is pretty straightforward CSS. We have our basically our default styling here. Now, I want to say one thing about this, okay? You can kind of choose what you want your default to be, okay? So a lot of people are of the opinion that you should make your default, what you style to, a mobile device, particularly a phone. And this is the whole first screen phenomenon. And basically what the first screen concept or idea says is that it evolves around what screen are people going to view your site on first. And so a lot of people believe that, for the longest time, the first screen was the TV, and then computers got invented and it became the desktop or laptop. And then as, mobile devices gain in popularity, that now that first screen is the mobile phone or the mobile device. Okay. So again, that's a lot of theory that you could obviously disagree with, and it may be different for your particular site, or if you're building a site for a client, it may be different for their site. Their first screen may not be a mobile device. So it really kind of depends, but you can make your default kind of whatever you want it to be. And so you do that based on how you write your queries, and how you write your default styling here. Here we're going with the theory that our default or our first screen is more of a phone, anything less than 768 pixels. Okay, so you'll notice that our responsive design starts applying at 768 pixels. Anything below 768 pixels is going to get what's up here. Okay, so that's us targeting anything less than 768 pixels as basically our default design. Again, if you wanted to change that, you would just change how you wrote your queries. You may have to change to max width instead of min width in order to target differently. So again, it comes down to your belief about what the first screen is. It also comes down to the particular site you happen to be working on and what the first screen for that site might be. But again, just so you're aware, we're targeting anything less than 768 pixels as our default. Okay, so when we're less than 768 pixels, the width of our span is going to be 100%. Now, all of the rest of this is really just actually, let me go ahead and kind of separate this out, because there's some things I want to talk about and some things that don't really matter. Okay, so we'll put the things that don't matter down below. All right, so our background color and our height, that's really just for the demo purposes. You don't really need to pay attention to that. And I'm going to go ahead and put the margin in that category as well. This is just basically to make it 20 pixels auto is to make it centered, and then to give some space on the top and bottom. So if you come over here, we have a little space up here. That's just to add that. It's really just for demo purposes, so it displays and is a little bit easier to work with. But these are really the things that matter up here, and I'm going to talk about these last three here in a second and why those matter. But again, for anything less than 768 pixels, we're targeting width of 100%. Once we get to 768 pixels, we're going to make that span 750 wide. Once we get to 992, we're going to target 980 pixels. And once we get to 1200, we're going to target 1170 pixels. Again, this is all fairly arbitrary, except for, this is based around iPad vertical position. This is going to apply to, basically an iPad in the horizontal position, and anything bigger than that up to 1200 pixels, and then this 1200 pixels is going to apply to anything obviously bigger than that, which would be like a desktop, probably most laptops, and so forth. To be truthful, this may be, when you're building your design, this width above 1200 pixels may be what you target as your first screen, because a lot of people still build their site with how it's going to look on a desktop or a laptop as their first concern, and then they just make it mobile friendly from there. So you may target this. In that case, you would probably need to target max widths instead of min widths, so that you can build your default for 1200 pixels and greater, and then then you can essentially target smaller widths and change things from there. Okay, so if you'll notice the way that this works, the way that it looks, top to bottom, this is when using min widths, this is our smallest targeting. So this is below 768, then our next level, then our next greater, then our next greater. If you flip that around and change these all to max widths, then you would put like we talked about before, you'd probably get rid of the 1200, you'd put the 992 on top, and then 768 down below. And now this up here would be your biggest width, so you could target desktops and things bigger than 1199, and then your next size smaller, and then your next size smaller, and so on down the list. Okay, so again, it depends how you want to target. All right, so this is, if you go to, say, Bootstrap 2.3, I believe this is pretty much how they did, how they built that particular framework using fixed widths like this. Now, you remember from the fluid grid, we actually moved on from that, and we're targeting percentage width. So if we come over here to our style sheet for our fluid grid, you'll notice that here we're actually using percentage widths. It's really the same idea. It just makes it adds a little bit of flexibility to the design when you're not targeting fixed width, when you're using percentages as well. So it kind of gives you a guarantee that, if something wonky happens to happen or happens to go down, you're still probably going to get your design looking not bad, because you have a percentage width as opposed to a fixed width. There could be a scenario with something like this where, who knows, for some reason this style gets applied even if your screen size is less than 768 pixels, let's say. So if you're specifying a hard number like that, there's a chance, it's pretty unlikely, but there's a chance that this could get applied and cause some stuff to be messed up. Whereas with the fluid grid, you don't have to worry about that. Also, what's really handy when using these percentage widths as opposed to fixed widths like this, and if you've used Bootstrap, that's one of the main differences between 2.3 and 3.0, is that you can actually nest these spans, and it works. Whereas if you try and nest spans with a fixed width like this, it doesn't work as well, because they're fixed width. Here, when you nest spans inside of one another, it's using a percentage width. So if the width happens to be, let's say we have a 12 column width of 100%, and that's inside a container that happens to be 1200 pixels wide, and then inside of that we nest a span 6 and two span 6s, it's going to calculate that whatever the parent width is. So it's going to create two 600 pixel wide spans. If you go inside each one of those 600 pixel wide spans and you nest another two more span 6s, because it's a percentage width, it's going to make those spans now each 300 pixels wide, and you can nest on down the line and it's going to continue to work. Whereas if you try to do that with a fixed width, it just doesn't work. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, you probably, for a fluid grid, you'd want to use these percentage widths. Now, obviously, to figure out what these percentages should be, you just do a little math, which is always fun. But if you're doing a 12 column layout, you know that your total width is going to be 100%. So you do 100 divided by 12 to get what you should get for one column. Okay, so that's 8.333. And if you want to figure out what you should get for a 2 column, then you take 100 divided by 2. Or, sorry, not by 2. 100 divided by 6. And that gives you 16.66667. Okay, so that's how these are calculated. This one is 100 divided by 4. So that gives you 25%, and so on. Okay. Now, one thing that's important with these is you'll notice that I have 8.33333. You might think, well, why not just do 8.3? Well, the reason that I put these out to 10 decimals essentially. The reason that we do these is because it creates greater precision. If you do just 8.3, if we bring back up our calculator, if we do 8.3 times 12, which is how this is how it's going to appear on your page, because it's going to say, okay, it's 8.3, so we're gonna, and you put 12 span ones across, it's going to just add those together. So if you do 8.3 times 12, what you get is 99.6. So there's about 4/10 of width that your design is essentially going to be off. All right, so that is a decent amount. Now if we do 8.3 and we put it out to 10 places, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we times that by 12. Now you see we get 99.9999996. That is a lot more accurate. That's closer to 100%. Okay, we're never going to be able to get exactly 100% with this. We'll either be just under or just over, and we don't want to be just over. So we want to be as close to under as we can be. Obviously, the further you take this out, the better. I've taken out to 10 places here. You could certainly take it out even more if you'd like, but the greater number of decimal places you go out with these percentage widths, the more accurate your design is going to be. And that's very important, especially when you're working, with designers and people who really want their site to look sharp. You want to make sure you're as accurate as possible. All right, so this is important. All right, so for these percentage widths, again, this is another way of doing dynamic widths. Again, we've saw with the fluid grid video that these will then change as the container that they're contained within changes. And we actually saw that in the liquid layout video as well. All right, so that's kind of the nuts and bolts of dynamic width. Now, the last thing that I want to cover is really the box sizing. Now, this is pretty important. So to show you that, I'm going to go ahead and comment these out. And now that those are commented out, we'll go ahead and head over and we'll refresh our page. And we're going to resize this. And you'll notice that when I get down to the bottom here, now suddenly I have scroll bars. And you might be like, oh, why do I have scroll bars? Well, the reason that happens is because of our padding. We're adding padding of 40 pixels. We have a width of 100% and then a padding of 40%. And by default, browsers render this box sizing setting as content box as opposed to border box. Now, it might be, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, again, I'm going to point you to an article on the Mozilla Developer Network, and it talks about box sizing. And there's a lot of stuff here, but ultimately, what we're after is how this is actually rendered. So the values. Okay, so it's the box sizing property, right? Box sizing, and then these are the values that you can enter. So we have content box, we have padding box, and we have border box. By default, it renders it as content box. So you can see it says this is default style as specified by the CSS standard. So it's the browser's doing what it's supposed to. And this says that the width and height properties are measured including only the content, but not the border, margin, or padding. So any padding that you add to a element that has the default content box property set or value set for the box sizing, it's going to take whatever you set as the width and then add 40 pixels to it. So since this is 40 pixels all the way around, it's actually 80 pixels on the right, or 40 pixels on the right, 40 pixels on the left, so a total of 80 pixels. That's why when we get down here to 100% width, it actually makes it bigger. It makes it bigger than 100%. So that's what gives us the scroll bar. Now, obviously, as you get out here, it doesn't make as much of a difference, although I think some of these, yeah, you'll see right here, we get scroll bars because our responsive pieces they're not expecting that padding essentially. Okay, they're not accounting for it. Right? So again, with the box sizing, we need to account for that. So you can see here it says padding box says the width and height properties include the padding size, but do not include the border or margin. Well, that's a little better, but oftentimes this is the big one. Margin is somewhat relative here, but the big one is border, because again, a lot of designs include borders, and even just 1 pixel, if your border is 1 pixel width, that can throw off the design, especially if you're doing a width of 100%. Well, if you have a one pixel border on each side, that's going to cause you the scroll bars to appear. So the one that we're ultimately after is the border box, and that says the width and height properties include the padding, border, but not the margin. Okay, so that's really what we're after, because the margin, again, when it comes to these kinds of designs, the margin is mostly meant to center the design. And you also understand most people understand if you add margin, it's going to be outside of the width. This is what kind of makes sense. I almost think that this should be the default. Right, so when you're working with responsive designs, that's pretty much what you need to do. Otherwise, you have to go through and account for your padding in all your different scenarios. Now, you could do that, and you could do that by, instead of using a fixed pixel width or fixed pixels for your padding, you could say this is, say, 96%, and then this is 2%. So that's going to, if you take 96% and then 2% on the right, 2% on the left, that adds up to 100. That gives you a similar effect. So if we come down here, you'll notice that now we have more white space over here. However, we're not getting the scroll bars like we were before. So you can do it that way, but then you end up dealing with a lot of having to add in this padding and calculate all that. It's much easier to just leave the border box on and do 100% widths and then get your padding included into that. Okay, so that's one of the big things to keep in mind when it comes to dynamic widths. All right, so that is the ins and outs of dynamic widths, some of the gotchas and best practices and so forth. So hopefully you found that helpful, and I'll talk to you later.